Today, we have a distinguished panel. We have Mr. Alberto Perez, a HIV long-term survivor and a national local HIV advocate from Miami, Florida. We have Larry Bryant, him, a HIV long-term survivor, manager of the National Education Program, peer-to-peer, National Alliance on Mental Illness. We have Derek Canvas, D-Rake, HIV long-term survivor, creator of End the Stigma campaign. Derek, Angels and Wars. We have Sean Mark, HIV long-term survivor, advocate for HIV stigma reduction. And last, we have Mr. Clayton Simmons, a medical peer navigator speaker for CAN Community Health, Sarasota, Florida. Our session description. We'd like everyone to join us, Deposit Unter Empowerment Group. And the reason we are called the Unter Empowerment Group, we inspire and empower everyone to look within themselves that's living with HIV and to empower oneself. And as one empowered themselves, they're able to help others. This work group is to learn about the power of peer support for heterosexual men living with HIV, an often overlooked group. And one of the things we gonna focus on today, this evening, is the power of peer support, breaking the chains of stigma as we age with HIV. Pain shared is pain lessened. And because we're involved in many social media platforms over the internet, it has allowed us to meet together as men, heterosexual men living with HIV. We formed this group during the pandemic, and for the first time, many of us are meeting for the first time in person. So we would like to welcome this distinguished panel. Everyone, let's give everyone a hand. And Mr. Sean, he's going to begin us off.
Thank you, Derek.
Yeah.
So when we were putting together this panel, we decided that we wanted to really start by talking about what Derek just mentioned about Zoom and how we were able to come together from our various spots in America. And under being able to come together with the digital platform, we're able to share what's going on in our lives with other people who are interested and also going through the same stuff. You know, this tool really got us united in a way that was able to do work. In my day job, in a volunteer role, I actually serve for the Ryan White Planning Council in Middle Tennessee. Being able to now be able to use Zoom, the platform, to reach participants means that I no longer have to actually set up meetings in 13 counties and go physically be present. Now I can set up a meeting, a portal, and advertise to my clients in those 13 counties to log on. I can actually have them all meet in one place, and it's just that much more efficient. That's just my take on how the internet's just been so awesome since 2020 and since the regulations were lifted and allowing us to do that. That was a tool that we didn't know we needed until it was given to us. And part of our takeaway at the end of this thing is going to be asking for tools that we might be unaware of as a community, but tools that maybe other agencies outside of HIV are using. Maybe we can look at those tools and adopt tools as well. But I'm going to pass it on to somebody else to talk about it too.
One thing I usually do is social media. It's a way to reach a lot of people. And I love it. I got to meet all of you guys, and I continue doing it because that's another way you can reach people. But we got to continue doing it, not today only, but we got to continue doing it every time that we need to. I mean, because we have to be included. We need to do everything that we need to do for ourselves. And I'm grateful to Howard University that they gave us the space, and I cannot even say anything. I'm so emotional that we're gonna continue doing what we're supposed to do. Is overdue after 40 years that we'll be living, with HIV and all that. So, I'm gonna continue doing what I love to do. That's me. I do that through social media every day, and that's how I'm going to reach people, and hopefully I'll reach more people. And I pass the mic to Mr. Clint.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Clayton. Speaking on the tools of the internet, the virtual meetings that came out of COVID, they opened the door to a support group I now run. So, having gone to a few conferences now and getting involved in advocacy, I really realized the lack of visibility for hetero men and the lack of resources. So one thing I wanted to do was facilitate a support group for hetero men. I'm local to Sarasota, Florida, Sarasota, Northport, Sarasota County. The actual physical number of hetero men that wanted to attend the group was not very high, and by using the virtual platform, I was able to find the 2 or 3 guys in different cities and different states that were looking for that support group, and it allowed us all to meet together, which has been tremendous. The flexibility it affords, in some cases, privacy it affords, has been a huge boon. So I just wanted to mention that.
I know when I first got the email about this group, my first thought was another Zoom meeting. During the pandemic, I had been Zoomed out. That's how I dealt with clients, everything else. I'm also a DJ, so that's how I was dealing with my DJ clients, was virtual meetings. So the last thing I wanted to do was to sit in another Zoom call. But I'm so glad I took this one. Truly found brotherhood. You guys are family now and will always be. We started a journey that we've been fighting for years to get here. And it's amazing that we're here.
So one thing I have to kind of pause is when we talk about some of the tools through social media of connection, sharing resources, just connecting with other humans. I realize this is not a new situation. Yeah, COVID forced us into a virtual world. It forced us to build these bridges that were screaming to be built decades ago. I remember in the mid-2000s, 2005, fighting for transportation and resources for people out in rural communities in South Carolina. People living in places where health departments and nonprofits weren't able to reach or weren't willing to reach. We built Zoom because we were forced inside. We built virtual spaces because we were forced apart and isolated. But we built it because of the need, of a broader need. So that the tools have always been there. It's now with not just political will, obviously, in putting those resources in the places, whether it's funding the outreach programs for the nonprofits we saw sitting up here earlier today, or in rural places where the stigma is so thick, you can't even see the people in your neighborhood because they're so far away. They're not coming near you. So a lot of this, and I work currently in mental health, so a lot of the challenges of reaching people in rural communities, reaching people who needed these life-saving, life-preserving resources didn't just begin to exist in 2020, in 2019. Everyone in this room understands what that distance looked like 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Is what we're going to do now, going forward, to make these connections permanent, to make these bridges sturdy enough to not just last to the next pandemic, because it's coming. It's going to happen, because we as a country are not, or have not, at least to this point, been willing enough to look the HIV and AIDS epidemic in this country, in these communities, directly in the eye. We have never been properly introduced to what this epidemic has always been. I've been HIV positive, living with HIV for more than 36 years. Back when it was defined as a gay-related infectious disease condition for people. I'm a straight man, I've always been straight. Never for a weekend was I experimenting. And the girl who I contracted HIV from when I was in college, she didn't know either. So we need to make sure we're building these bridges with more concrete intention and more positive outcomes, measurable positive outcomes for everyone involved, whether we're talking about providers, whether we're talking about people, family members and supporters, and certainly when we're talking about prevention and education for those who it impacts most closely. So I am not of the age where I am coming out with new apps and new technology. I guess I'm coming out today as old. Although I feel like it's been on my face for a while. But we need to put more resources, attention, intentional action into building these connective resources, whether it's through the internet, through things like this. Nothing compares to in-person connection, nothing. But in lieu of that, we need to build those virtual bridges with much more intention and much more concrete resources so that they last and they work and that we do this more often and save lives.
Thank you. You know, one of the greatest tools that we have today is that most people have been educated about HIV. We know. Like Larry said, what must we do? Now that we know, what must we do? And I think what's distinct about the panel that's sitting here today, we have a person that was born with HIV. We have a person that got HIV through blood transfusion. And that makes this group unique because we're looking at all aspects of HIV as a whole. And as heterosexual men, we want it to be normalized where we're just people living with HIV. That's all we are. We have the same laughter and we have the same joy as anybody else, as any person. We endure the same pain, we endure the same grief, we endure the same loss as any other person. And to be thought of as a person and to be thought of as just a human being living with a virus. I think COVID brought on a unique situation. And the unique situation that it brought on is because we're able to talk to the person that was newly diagnosed during COVID. And when that person comes onto our platform, we have to grasp that person. And the reason we have to grasp that person is that there's no support groups that person could go to because everybody was shut down. I have a diagnosis. I can't go to the agency. The agency doesn't have a support group. If it wasn't for the people that's sitting on the panel that opened up that platform for the newly diagnosed. If it wasn't for the people that's sitting here, the people that during the COVID that couldn't go and get that operation, what happened to them? That person that was scheduled for surgery, now it's delayed because of COVID. I need a support group. Now I know I'm living with HIV. I know I'm not going to die by HIV, behind HIV, but I got prostate cancer, and I can't go see my doctor no more. I'm talking to my doctor through telehealth, but I need to get this surgery done because I want to live. I need to be able to go to dialysis, but they're shut down now. I need someone to talk to. Any other person needed someone to talk to because they couldn't get to their doctor. You know, everything was delayed, and we just opened up the platform to normalize HIV because we're able to live with HIV today. But we have other comorbidities that we need help with. It happens to every other person, but with us, we have to be careful. We have to make sure the medication is going to work with the medication that we take. That's something a lot of other people don't look at. And so we're going to open it up for another question to the panel.
So what you were just saying right there, like, really hits the nail on the head. You know, many times in the support groups that we run in Tennessee, we'll have clients come in and express pain or discomfort, you know, and we'll ask, you know, did you have a new regimen, or how long have you been on your regimen? And many times it'll come up that they're actually just side effects from this regimen. And the newly diagnosed you can't really tell the difference between a side effect from the medicine and maybe something they should go look up in their doctor. Being able to come to the group and actually voice that concern and have people who have already taken the medicine or lived through similar experiences are able to share their wisdom and knowledge and at least allow them the comfort of knowing this isn't something new, this isn't a new condition you're going through, this is just a common side effect that we all have. And, you know, a couple weeks it should minimalize. But I can't tell you how many times I've actually had to have that conversation just as a fellow peer with somebody, just to, you know, because they're like, I don't know if I can continue taking this medicine every day, because that's another stigma that we don't even really consider. You know, in the mental health world, that trying to get people to take their medicine is a huge thing to get them to do. Same with HIV, you know. We try to say it's just like taking your vitamins. You know what I mean? Like, I got to take a super pill, so take this other super pill, you know? But it's just those one step at a time, and being able to hold the actual interaction through the internet platform has just been so beneficial to my work, and I'm sure to everybody else's work here too.
One thing that I'm trying to do is to expand what Mr. Chan was saying about having a group in Miami and different places so we can grow and become more powerful, and so we can be able to get what we need. That's the bottom line. And thank God that I met all of you guys, you know, through the internet, because I was feeling lonely and I didn't have no one to talk to, but God is the one that helped me, and we're going to continue doing what we're doing.
So I do know in the support group I've started, we have a mix from fairly recently diagnosed, short-term living with HIV through long-term survivors. And like Sean was saying, the exchange of information is crucial. The heterosexual community deals with it's stigma, but it's a different sort of stigma than other demographics deal with. As heterosexual men, our society, our very nature, we seek a family. We seek a spouse, we want children. And historically, as the providers and protectors of the family unit. It's innate in us to want to protect our family. And that includes protection from finger pointing and whispering and shame. When I was first diagnosed, I was living in Northwest Georgia. I didn't know anything about HIV. When I was diagnosed, I believe one of the most important things I could do was look to my other male friends, other fathers. And what I didn't expect was my daughter coming home from school crying because her best friend said they can't play together because their dad is now scared of me. We have to, as heterosexual males, that's a stigma we deal with. We deal with, like I say, it's different stigmas, and I don't want to spend too much time getting into defining all that, but when I was looking for a support group, for a while I had gotten out of advocacy and was just a single dad trying to raise his daughter and stay healthy. I didn't know anybody publicly in my social circles that was identified as HIV positive. And, you know, sometimes we all need the support of somebody that is walking in our shoes or similar shoes, similar path. I started attending a male's HIV positive support group. I was the only straight male in the group, and they accepted me very well and are some of my closest friends. But I had stigma issues and issues that heterosexual men deal with that gay men necessarily do not. So by starting this virtual support group, it allows those men, I have a gentleman from Houston, Jacksonville, Miami, Space Coast. We can get together and have that fellowship. We have, it's provided people in our lives that are walking the path that we walk. Just for that fellowship and that support. And that's so desperately needed. It is so desperately needed.
You want to speak on David?
When I found this group, when I was diagnosed, let me go back, I was the only person that I knew of in my town. I didn't know anybody. So I started the Stigma campaign to educate and to find others. And I'm still searching in that area. But I also found my voice. And then finding that led me here. I didn't realize the lack of support until I looked. And I looked around a lot. And it just wasn't there. And when Derek found me, I mean, I was so happy. So happy that there was finally going to be a space. And our space is great. We have some of the funniest, I mean, just best brotherhood style Zooms that I've ever been a part of. Sometimes we stay on topic, sometimes we don't. I mean, it's more now just a checking in and making sure our brothers are okay. And that is so valuable to all of us on levels we didn't even realize until we got together.
So in my experience, living with HIV, even before I was diagnosed, I have seen, I know we're talking about the challenges of reaching heterosexual men living with HIV, providing a platform, providing experience, developing treatments that come from that experience, all that kind of stuff, whether it's outreach, treatment, care, prevention, et cetera. And I mean, I was diagnosed in '86. That playbook hadn't been written yet. But as that playbook started to get developed, there were a lot of us, a lot of people who look and sound like me. I was 18 years old, scholarship athlete at Norfolk State University. Sorry, Howard. Amongst football players, athletes, HIV didn't exist among us. And if it did, you weren't supposed to say anything. You weren't going to say anything. But a lot of that comes with this thing I like to call a pre-existing condition that comes with most straight males. And I'm using I statements here, but you guys can chime in as you like. Learn from our uncles, from our daddies, from our big brothers, from personalities on TV and in movies, from stand-up comedians across the board. And it's what makes us run from the help, from the education, from the support that we all need. Not just as someone, as a straight man living with HIV, but hell, just a man, right? This pre-existing condition, homophobia, ties us up in knots where we're not going to allow ourselves to be identified in the same capacity as these other people. So we're not going, never mind ignoring our own bodies and our own health, but avoiding the support that's out there for us, or that we can help shape, that we can help define. When we talk about every year, we all sit or have been a part of meetings where we're talking about budgets and funding and how we fund, how we develop a budget that reaches everyone. We talk about prevention, we talk about education. And there's always the fight between our different communities where we're talking about, well, the women get all this money, or trans community gets this money, white people get this money, blah, blah, blah. I get that exists. When instead we should be talking about just getting the bigger pie, so to speak. And going, when we think about, I was trying to get to the metaphor, but if we're all in the ocean and we're all drowning, we're all fearful, we're tired of swimming, our arms are exhausted. And there's a bunch of us in the ocean. Which boat do you get into? And who do you allow in? One, you get in the first boat that comes. And two, you help anyone you see around you. That's what I was taught. I don't care who they are. And a lot of us, straight men, perpetuate that even though we're drowning. When we can change and flip that so that we can be more of an asset to our community as well as an asset to ourselves, then we don't just save ourselves, but we help be a part of the solution for our entire community. We need to develop a vaccine for that pre-existing condition of homophobia and those other phobias that prevent us from just admitting our own humanity.
You know, Larry, when you said pre-existing conditions and the I statement, you know, I think HIV brings about a revolution that I don't want to be a player no more. You know, and what I mean by that, you know, I was diagnosed when I was 27 years old. And I can remember like going out to the club, coming home for the holidays, hanging out with my family, and they say, well, what's wrong with you, D? You know, you don't want to talk to no women no more, what's going on? You know, I never wanted to be in that situation again, because I know the behavior that led to my diagnosis. You know, and today, what happens when we come across newly diagnosed people that have never been in meaningful relationships in their life. And now comes that aha moment. Now I'm searching for a meaningful relationship, but now I'm living with the virus. During the pandemic, I want a meaningful relationship, and it's gonna come virtually, because nobody's seeing each other no more. All the stores are closed down. You're not meeting people at Walmart going down the aisle. You know, I want a meaningful relationship, but how do I gain that within myself? How do I empower myself? How do I have self-worth and self-value? Because I want a meaningful relationship. You know, what does it feel like at the age of 27? I had 3 children by that time, and I had grandchildren. But for the newly diagnosed young person, you know, we talk about women and we always talk about reproductive health. But what about that productive health for that young man that's newly diagnosed, that wants to have children? What does that person get information from? Now that I'm undetectable, what is my next step? Where do I go and grab that knowledge from? And it's not there. But the support group opened up that door for that knowledge, because we don't reproduce, we produce. But I still want a meaningful relationship. I still want to be able to have children. And I've been in that type of relationship where the person wanted to do the sperm washing. Derek, I want to have children. I was scared, because at that time there was no knowledge of a child could be born without being positive. So I had to end that relationship to let that person go on to fulfill their life, because they wanted to have children. Though they was willing to spend the money to have everything done, that was my fear. Because I really don't know, once a person get the diagnosis, I don't know whether that person can stay adherent to their medication. I don't know whether that person has that family support where they can still go there and eat at Thanksgiving. Some people still don't have that support there today from their family. I don't know whether that person will be invited to the family reunion and everybody steps away when everybody get ready to eat. So it's so important as we age with HIV, because we know 10% of the people that's being diagnosed with HIV now are over the age of 50. You know, what happens, is that a midlife crisis? Yes, a midlife crisis. You know, I'm over the age of 50 now. I have a diagnosis that I have to deal with on a daily basis. And that's the power of peer support and breaking the chains of stigma, because we're there. We're there. And our job is for that newly diagnosed person, for that young person, one day they're gonna look at us and say, this is what they did. I can turn the next page and to begin to do some of the stuff that Larry talked about. You know, when does it end? When does that pre-existing end? You know, when do I have that power? Because I work in prevention, and I know how hard it is to get heterosexual men to accept being on PrEP. Because of the vision they see on TV, they say, no, I'm not that way. I don't want to use that medication. And young people, they'll get up and say, I looked at the clinical study. Wasn't no heterosexual men in the clinical study. Why do you want me to take that medication? Because they have the power of the fingers today. They have the power to just say Google. And Google gonna put that information in their face. And those are some of the challenges that we face when we want to end the HIV epidemic, because I'm a heterosexual man. Since the 80s, they've been throwing condoms at us. I go in the barbershop, I grab 10 condoms. That's the solution for us. They just throw condoms at them. We just give them condoms. We're in the HIV epidemic. But we never look at the behavior. The behavior would never lie. When I test a person, they say, well, I don't want to see the results. I say, I'm not the master of your results, but your behavior will tell what your results are going to be. And the results that we're going to establish as this heterosexual men group moves on is that we're here, we're HIV positive, we're heterosexual men, and we're going to be included in everything about HIV. When it says nothing for us without us, we will be included, because it cannot end unless we address the whole issue. Sean.
That's a lot, Derek, and that was a lot of good stuff. To pick out some of the things you did mention about relationships, and you talked about untransmittable, undetectable equals untransmittable, you equals you. Man, that is just, to give you guys a little background to what I'm about to say, I am the member of the panel that contracted vertically. I was born positive for HIV. So that meant, as a child, every time I would go into my physician's office, I would overhear them talking to my parents that, oh, Sean's gonna die in about 2 years. Oh, Sean's got an expiration date. And I heard this as a child growing up. This was looming over my head, to the point where I ended up in puberty, like most young adults get to. Except I didn't have a support group like what I have now. I was all alone. I was isolated. Isolated in not only my self-stigma, but isolated in a culture and a society that didn't even understand how a white straight boy could be positive for HIV. So even though I was going to get and receive care from professional medical staff, many times me going in there was advocating for myself, advocating for my own needs. Many times was wrapped up in case studies, wrapped up in drug trials. Nevirapine, I don't know if anybody knows that or not. Nevirapine is a very chaotic medicine. It's very good, or it can be very bad. And I happen to be on the other scale of that. I developed Stevens-Johnson syndrome in 3rd grade. Very rare syndrome. But if you look it up, the statistics will tell you, majority of people who develop this syndrome do not survive it. And even still, majority of the survivors will have long-lasting scars. Luckily, I've only had my vision impaired from that. God definitely stepped in and blessed me with that. I couldn't see that for what it was then. When I went through puberty, because I didn't have the support, I didn't know that I needed to disclose. The laws had never been explained to me. I had been positive before 1996 and before HIV criminalization was even a thing. When it came to the point where I was faced with disclosing or ending a relationship that I was just trying to put together, and a relationship, mind you, I thought would never happen. I was always told that I should never expect love. I should never expect to be with a partner, and I should never expect to have a family. I let that get to me. I internalized that. I stopped taking my medication, and I ended up in the hospital when I was about 23 with 6 T cells and PCP pneumonia. It was then that I had my team of physicians around me. They were telling me there's this new rumor, there's this new evidence, like there's scientists and doctors, they're all talking about this thing, that if we can get your viral load under a certain amount, that it can become untransmittable to anybody. And it was that kind of hope that brought me out of the stink that I was stuck in. Not because I was already trying to find my way, that just came to me. And that was the light that eventually led me to U equals U. And I'm happy and proud to say that I'm actually one of the ambassadors from this newest cohort. I'm very grateful for that message, and I love to share it. Because in many ways, U equals U is my Star Wars, my new hope. And I love to be able to share that in the groups whenever I get a chance to talk to other people. I also love to be able to share that now, at 33 years old, I'm engaged to be married. You know? And to mirror what Derek was saying about, I had made my mind up to not being a father because I was afraid, because of stigma. You know, I couldn't see myself as being a truly loving parent if I was going to bring someone into the world who already had to start suffering from the very second, because I still wasn't sure about the science or the processes. I come from rural America, very low. My first job was blue collar. I don't have that kind of money either. I was so concerned. And now my fiance and I are talking about having our own children because of the miracle of U equals U. And the fact that now, after history, and I know many of you are probably there with us, and the church has taken 24 pills a day. We've gotten now to a time where we don't have to suffer through all those medicines. We can take one pill a day, and we can log into a support group, and we can feel like humans, like who we are, and be treated the same. And that's just been such a miracle for me to witness in my lifetime. So if there's anything else that I can lend to that movement, like I'm all for it. So thank you guys entirely. And thank you, Howard, for making the space to allow us the opportunity to share. Like we are all very passionate about it. And if you've noticed any of us tripping up, it's because our passions. You know, it's one thing to sit on the screen and your comfort and you know, laugh and joke around, and it's a whole nother thing to do it in front of other people. But I'm so proud of each and every member on this panel, and thank you all so much.
Wait, you got to go through puberty? I mean, my story actually starts cardiac. I found that actually the virus found me. I was going through open heart surgery to correct transposition of the great arteries in '85, and that's why I had to get Garanimals to special make a suit, because it's hard to find clothes. It's really, really hard to find clothes. And I am recently engaged. My fiance wanted to go buy a new suit for me to come here. And I had to explain to her, you don't go to the men's section. You have to walk through all the Transformers, Paw Patrol, and all the fun stuff to find my size. She fully enjoyed that experience. And she's watching, and that's how detrimental the virus is. It didn't let me grow. I've always called it Peter Pan syndrome. I'm 38 years old. barely 100 pounds, 5 foot tall, and I fight every day to be seen as a grown man. This group has never looked at me as anything but that. And I am so thankful for all of you guys here.
You know, we have one person that we're gonna allow him. We're gonna allow him to stand up and introduce himself. He's like the baby of the bunch. You know what I mean? And everybody. In some worlds they say people come out at a certain time, people grow up at a certain time, and he was able to grow up when he was like 31 years old. And he found us. He found us like last year. Yeah, the boys growing up. But he found us last year, and what was unique about it, see, when we talk about you equals you, being undetectable, I can remember in 1998, I was out doing my thing for a long time. I didn't want to accept the virus, so, I had chemical coping skills. And the chemical coping skills, kept me in the hospital. And when the COVID came along, I had PTSD because I can remember being on the ventilator. And I would have to pray every night because in Dallas, Texas, they had this wing. They had the 6th floor was for us, people that was positive. But they had 6B. When you went into 6B, it was a possibility that you might not come up because all us, they had to put us on ventilators. And the thing about it, when I took this medication in 1998, I said, Doc, what's the best thing that I got going? He said, we got a heart treatment. I said, let me try it. And in 30 days, he told me I was undetectable. I was like, what? And the thing about it, it hit my mind that, okay, now there's some hope. But what they didn't tell us that was it. You just undetectable. The you equals you component hadn't came into it. So it was a lot of shame and guilt behind, because who do you tell you undetectable? Right. What did that really mean, And sometimes it was like heartbreak and pain, especially when somebody accepts you for being HIV positive and they don't want you to use protection. And they love you to that extent, and in your mind, you're like, what kind of love is this? And you have to live with it. And then years later, you find out that undetectable means untransmittable. And when that person finds that out, they're like, why didn't you tell me way back then that undetectable meant untransmittable? I would have stayed with you. But you can't have me back now because you left me. Those are the type of, things that we need support on. Right. I thought I had a meaningful relationship, but that person decided, well, I just want to keep taking these chances, and I don't want to keep taking the chances of having unprotected sex either. Because I don't know, it might just be that fine line where you get pregnant and I have to deal with those issues. So the next brother, he's going to just talk a little bit about, the struggles of being undetectable, living all these years undetectable, not being able to tell anybody about his status, and the fear of knowing, like, every time you have sex with somebody, that it might be a possibility that they become positive. It might be a possibility that I might be prosecuted because they become possible. And the importance of having that partner, because my partner went to the doctor with me, went to get my lab work with me. There was going to be no identification that Derek did not tell me that he was HIV positive. If you in with me, you in all the way. Come on, Tony. Yeah.
Let's see if we can get a round of applause for Tony.
I am Tony from Cleveland. I 30 years diagnosed, and as you just heard Derek say, I'm a new baby. I just came out this month, actually. I mean, this year. Yeah. In March was my first retreat that I attended. I had a prestigious job with the city of Cleveland. I dealt with kids, adults, everybody, and I couldn't tell them. I couldn't tell them for fear that I would lose my job. So I lived 30 years behind this mask. I'm gonna make it short. I'm not gonna go through all that. A couple of weeks before I went to my first retreat, I laid up in my bed and I asked God, I said, is this how I'm gonna die? Because I had been there for months, years, not doing anything. And I got a call a couple of weeks later from a gentleman that I met at a picnic for HIV people right before the pandemic. And 3 years later, he called me and said, I want to take you to a retreat, a healing retreat. I didn't know what he was talking about. I had never been anything like this because, see, when I was diagnosed, they didn't have support groups in Cleveland. You had to go to the outskirts, to the surrounding suburbs to attend support groups. And in '92, when I attended the support group, I was the only black individual in that group. And I wasn't welcome. I wasn't accepted like I felt I should be. So I turned around and I walked out that door, and that started my 30 years of hiding. I say this to say to the next person that you don't have to wait 30 years. You don't have to take 14, 15 pills 3 times a day, because now it's only 1 pill a day. You don't have to suffer and go through what I went through for 30 years because you got support now. Come on out and get it. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
You know, we were talking about U equals U, and, you know, to my mind, this conference is breaking the chains of stigma. Stigma has been perpetuated, in my opinion, because of a lack of education. Back in the 80s and early 90s, HIV and AIDS was all over the television, all over newspapers. We all remember those days. But the late 90s brought medication, and that changed it from a deadly disease to a chronic and manageable disease. For some. That's about the time HIV dropped off the radar. For some, I'm speaking generally, okay. As a hetero white male growing up, we weren't taught HIV education in school. Well, you know, it was mentioned as a gay cancer when I was in health class, but my point being, even that mention of HIV dropped off public education because it was out of the news, right? The immediacy of death faded, and so did education. I was mentioned earlier, I was a single dad, and when I was raising my daughter, she went through that age of what we call sex ed in Florida education system is health, because you can't. All right. I had to have those awkward conversations with my daughter because she wasn't getting it in school. Now, I raised my kids with honesty. I felt like they were going to witness my struggles. They were going to ask questions why I was struggling and what my health problems were. And that opened the door to disclosing to my children in age-appropriate phases on what I was dealing with. And my mindset was, if they saw the negative impacts of the decisions I made, my children would probably be less likely to repeat those mistakes. That was my approach. When it got time to have sex education with my daughter, I forced those awkward conversations because the school system was not. And I'm a firm believer in education. I think stigma has been perpetuated because there's no more education. And society seems to keep being stuck on repeat. We hear the same old, misinformation from the 80s today. It's like, it's crazy to my mind. So we have to break the stigma. And how do we do that? I think education is the way. And U equals U affords opportunities for discussion. And it erodes the very stigma itself, right? So I got remarried in March of 2020, right as COVID hit, boom. So the big ceremony, thank you. The big ceremony became, 10 people because it was COVID. My wife now, my fiance, is a little bit younger than I am. She's 13 years younger than I am. So she came up in the 90s, and there was no mention of HIV. And her comment to me when she realized I was positive was, oh, I thought we got rid of that. Okay, I'm just telling you, this is the understanding. Now, thankfully for me, she was open to learning, being educated. We had that U equals U discussion. That brings me to my second point. Being diagnosed in the 90s, I was taught that I'm the danger. Sex, for me, was endangering, risking somebody else. And that was drilled in, and that became internalized. And it wasn't until I got remarried and I had to have the discussion with my wife, about U equals U, and I educated her on PrEP. And here's the funny thing. She was not interested in PrEP. She didn't understand why she would need to take PrEP if I'm undetectable. If U equals U is true, then where's the risk? And I have to admit, there's a part of me that kind of panicked, like, U equals U has been, we don't have any evidence against it at this point. It's established. But what if that 1 in a billion thing happened, right? And she said, no, you're undetectable. I'm okay with having unprotected sex. And she wants children. And that was another thing I was taught. I'd probably get to Mars before I could ever have children. And to be honest, her acceptance of the facts and it scared me. It was so against what we're taught. It took a while to be comfortable in a sexual relationship having unprotected sex without that voice in my ear talking about there's risk, you're the danger, I share all that. I really think U equals U can change stigma. And I want to encourage everybody here, if you ever get the opportunity to bring it up in a discussion, please do it. Please further the message, because I think it'll go a long way to breaking that stigma. Thanks.
We're getting ready to open up the floor
Derek.
for.
Okay. Do you want to?
Well, all I wanted to say was,
Go ahead.
I had chimed in. I apologize, Clayton. I say not everyone because early 90s, I remember Andrew Sullivan writing an article. For those of you who aren't familiar with Andrew Sullivan, a gay white man, he's a writer, journalist, very influential in multiple fields, multiple categories, wrote that because of the newly formed Ryan White Care Act and benefits and services that he was able and people like him were able to get, that the AIDS epidemic was over for him in the 90s. A year later, less than a year later, there's a vice presidential debate with John Edwards and the other guy, Dick Cheney. And Gwen Ifill, a black woman moderating it, actually brings up that the number one, the fastest growing, fastest rates of infections, new infections are among black women in this country. A black woman asking two people who want to be second in line to run the country, set policy, asked the question of what they were going to do to make sure this was addressed. It was the only time during that debate where they looked at each other and shook their head because they had no idea that it existed and they had no idea what to do next. That's why I say it wasn't everyone who found those services. It wasn't anyone who was rescued. I'm one of those rare native Washingtonians. I grew up, my dad and his brothers live in the city, the nation's capital, arguably the capital of the world, where young black men are seen as historically as dangerous and not useful to society. And there are parts of this city still, again, the nation's capital, the capital of the free world, parts of this city where people still aren't, you heard them sitting up on the podium earlier, still aren't getting the attention, the prioritization just to save their lives. These are recurring themes that we are a part of, regardless of our sexuality, regardless of our gender. When I first got into this work, was long after I was diagnosed. I went 5 years, didn't say anything. Dropped out of school, forgot about professional football. 5 years, I didn't tell anyone until I saw Magic Johnson on screen saying he was diagnosed with the virus that causes AIDS. Because again, the term HIV positive didn't exist yet. And I had no choice but to just say, because I just kept this horrible secret. I knew I was going to die. I am not going to plug any treatments, but I do believe that treatment helps, and it's a personal choice. If I had got on whatever medication was available in 86, 87 when I was first diagnosed, I may have died from those symptoms, from AZT. And I would not have learned that I am a long-term non-progressor. I'm 36 years, most of my life I've been undetectable even before I take meds. So I'm not saying that people shouldn't take meds or whatever treatment is they're kind of shuffled towards. I'm saying that we should be educating people on what the options are so that people can make informed choices to what those choices are. We can be a part of that group, and we should, as heterosexual men living with HIV, and we got to shorten that name, if the parties aren't happy, or we aren't being invited to those parties, those support groups, if we aren't being invited to those parties where prevention and education strategies, outreaching to people who are high at risk, or any risk, if we're not invited, then damn it, we either show up or we make our own party. And this is, again, 30, 40 years. I don't know how many years I've been at conferences, at meetings with mayors, with council people, with Congress people. I was in the room with President Obama, and I have not what I want to make sure is that when we demand the resources necessary to lower the risk, to identify the situation among straight men, young boys growing up, that we are not separating, we're not isolating or siloing that rescue effort, that we are developing the full plan, that we are a part of the entire community. And there is no way, no one on this podium is like, hey, heterosexual men, we need to be prioritized. No, we need to be a part of the group. And again, I remember the first time I had one of these meetings. It was at one of these conferences. I'm not going to say the name of it, but you all know who I'm talking about. And there were a bunch of people in the room who weren't men and who weren't heterosexual or didn't identify as heterosexual, but it was standing room only, and the people who were there to speak didn't have a chance to speak, because everyone else was telling us about what we should do. Using our voices, and this circles back to peer support. And hearing the voices, hearing the experiences, sharing the experiences, it starts with that first. We have to be able to share our experiences, not just on a mic, in a podium, but wherever we are. Because they will be heard. And we need to do more of that. We need to be more proactive. Yes, does NMAC and other entities around the country that do the work need to make space? Yes. But there's nothing, as we keep saying, there's nothing without us.
Nothing for us without us.
That means us need to show up as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we are a part of the us that's present here. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. We have a question.
First off, I want to say thank you for I appreciate it. First, I wanted to say thank you for all of you being here. As somebody who is HIV positive, and but I'm not heterosexual, I'm bisexual, but my partner identifies as female, and we've been having these same conversations about children, engagement, what that means for our own children, and so we understand that ignorance can lead to stigma, and stigma can lead to criminalization, and I've noticed that we've hit that topic a couple times, and one of the main things in Kentucky is that they target sex workers, and if they're not able to convict them on an HIV-related crime, they go automatically to wanton endangerment, which is a Class D felony in Kentucky, which gets your voting rights taken away and job opportunities taken away too. Anyways, I say all that because of the possibility of us having children. Has it ever crossed your mind of somebody reporting you to CPS? Derek, especially in your situation with your child coming home crying. I just wanted to expand more on that idea, criminalization in your own area or just in the United States.
If, Derek, if you don't mind. Yeah. So now we're getting into the discussion about policy. And policy is near and dear to my heart, passion project. I recently was engaged with an organization trying to get a bill passed in the state of Tennessee that we would actually, currently in the state of Tennessee, if somebody is convicted of an HIV-related crime, not only do you do prison time, but automatically you're put on the sexual offenders list. So this has been a real issue in my neck of the woods where there's some advocates I work with who, because of law and because of the courts, wasn't allowed to breastfeed her own child in a room alone. And this is not just an isolated case. So when you talk about the child endangerment laws and all that, these things need to be removed. And the way to get that removed is to show up to encourage people in your circles to vote, doing your research in politics and that kind of stuff. It's a whole job on its own. But there is a lot of HIV policy and lawmaking entities out there trying to do a lot of good work. I also try to pair with legal services. There's an HIV law and policy center, I think it is, but they actually have lawyers trained in HIV law, and they help, and you just reach out and they'll come to your area to try to give you an idea about these laws. Another thing though, so even though we're in the heterosexual community, one of my stepchildren is of the trans community. So I don't treat this person any other way except for the child that I love and care for. So when political powers that be start coming around and taking advantage of the child that I help raise because he's trans, then, as a parent, I have a right to step in and tell them, hey, that's just not right. On a human level, it's not right that you're forcing this child to have to use restrooms where they're going to be preyed on. Just because something right now doesn't make sense and there's laws in place against it, doesn't mean that showing up and speaking out won't be able to change that in the future. So to answer your question is, don't give up. Don't give up the faith. Because as you can put together, we've been surviving here for at least 30 years apiece. And there's been a lot of stuff that has changed since then. So, just keep holding the faith and keep, believing in yourself and keep an eye out for your fellow man, and maybe one day after we get all this HIV stuff taken care of, we can also get to the polls too. But at least that's my opinion.
Yeah, question? Okay.
First of all, I just want to say this is commendable. This is the first time I think I've seen 7 heterosexual men admit to living with HIV, so that's applause right there. So I'm just encouraged. But as a woman of trans experience who identifies as heterosexual, I would question, when did you decide to be sharing your status? Because I just hate this word, disclosing a status, which means I've got a secret, and sharing just sounds so much better to me. So how do you deal with that? How did you decide when you would share it? And I just want to honor you for speaking up for your child of trans experience.
I think it's an individual choice when to do it and how to do it and where to do it. Everybody comes from different backgrounds. Everybody comes from different places. I know people that want to be open. They have mortgages. They have jobs. You have to be okay with your family. I have children, I have grandchildren. So I have to speak, not only did I have to speak to my children about it, I have to speak to my grandchildren about it. My granddaughter goes to Florida A&M, and I did a presentation at Florida A&M, and I asked her before I came on campus, how do you feel about it? When they say, I said, I was at that class that your granddad did the presentation. I have to protect her mentally because she's in college and she's going to college for a reason. So a person disclosing their status and being open about their status, to me, is an individual choice. But I think HIV has put a heartbeat in all of us. And when we just hear the drums, when we hear the guitar, when we hear the bass, we just respond to the beat of the music. And we pat our feet and we move on.
It's also like the power of storytelling, right? It's the more we hear other people sharing, even if it's just a snippet of their experience, it's like sitting in an isolated space. You feel like there's no one around you that can understand at all what you're going through, what you're living with, and it's represented in like this empty balloon. but you keep that balloon deep in your pocket. You're not going to show anyone
Love you, man.
this balloon. And then all of a sudden, you look out on the horizon, you just see this one balloon just going up. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then all of a sudden, another balloon goes up. And then it's like a domino effect. All these balloons start going up. People are sharing their stories. It gives me a little more confidence to reach down in my pocket, pull that balloon out, put some of my own air in it, and then join the group. And the more we are willing to share our stories, and I get that there's a lot of trauma that comes with retelling that space. And to Derek's point, it's a personal choice for anyone. But when we do break through, when someone breaks through to tell their story, to share their experience, it empowers everyone in the room, even when you don't know it does. It doesn't necessarily normalize it, because then you got to deal with the story. You got to walk through the story. You got to analyze the story. You process it. But you got to share the story. And the more we are willing to share that story, our stories, our own personal stories, from our own experience, then it gives a level of comfort and confidence to those who still have that balloon deep down in their pocket and just won't admit that they have it. And I feel like we can do that with all of us. I mean, again, our shared experience isn't just based on our sexuality. It isn't just based on who we have sex with or and by the way, unprotected sex is unprotected sex regardless of who you are or who you're having it with. So that is the initial stigma. When we start classifying who we are or who we aren't, then all we're doing is adding to the division, I think. But again, those stories bring us together because whether I'm gay or straight, I live with depression and anxiety. And maybe that part of my story is something that, regardless of who anyone else is sleeping with, they can connect to. Some of us are vegans, some of us still eat meat. Maybe that matters. Maybe that's the detail that sticks out. I used to tell, I remember early on, telling or disclosing rather, was more out of, or not disclosing, was more out of self-preservation. When I was diagnosed, there were two brothers, I'll never forget the story, two brothers living in Florida. One was diagnosed HIV positive, but through a transfusion. But the neighborhood they lived in didn't matter. He was HIV positive. He was AIDS. He was AIDS. This is what they said, he was AIDS. So the neighborhood got together and burnt his house down because they didn't want them living in their neighborhood. That was the environment I lived in I was in college, but that was the environment I lived in. I was scared to disclose. Not because I didn't want to. Hell, I've been told a secret that my world is going to end in 9 years. I was told in 1986 I had 9 years to live. I wanted to tell someone, I was just scared. So when I finally told my mom after 5 years, it was like such a release just to share. Now was long before being on a cover of a magazine and all doing this, but it was just the self-preservation of, I don't want someone to come burn down my house or my mom's house. Then it became, well, I would just tell my experience. And people would find out or catch whatever they needed, connect to whatever they needed based on that experience, whatever piece of that story they connected to. And I used to just talk about the choices and everything, but that were made by people that sometimes will find themselves in vulnerable positions, and just talk about all of this. And I wouldn't even disclose until the very end, and then people were completely surprised because they looked at me and they didn't see HIV positive. I'm not sure what you're supposed to see when you look at someone like that. But I wanted to make sure that my storytelling from that point was, I'm just sharing my experience. However that helps you, hopefully it does. Now I love the energy of helping people kind of find their own space. using their own words, sharing their own experience, whether it's to share it with peers or share it with council members or people, lawmakers, policymakers. Our stories matter, and us telling them confirms that they matter.
I started disclosing out of self-preservation because I couldn't handle the whispers. Going around a small town in Georgia, word got out really fast after I was diagnosed. So I started telling everybody I could what it was. I was diagnosed with AIDS. I survived 16 years undiagnosed. That's why I look the way I look. And I look like the pictures from the magazines in the early 90s. I am exactly what an AIDS patient looked like back then. So I couldn't hide. So me disclosing was my self-preservation mode.
We have a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Is it on already? Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Caprice from University of Louisville. My question is a little bit broad. When you guys were talking about, I think, Clayton, you said something about I don't know, one of you guys said something about the policy and getting engaged and having more or less a seat at the table. It made me think of something that, my father has a program that's called We Our Us, and it's kind of the brotherhood where the brothers of the community and the church get together and they go about the community and pulling people together in support of one another. And what also pulled me back into the work that we do, dealing both with the issue of the invisibility of heterosexual men in HIV care and treatment, knowing that more of the men that are coming into care are the heterosexual positive population and heterosexual women. And so we are doing that push right now to get that education message out there. So I was wondering what you guys thought about being that kind of collaborative effort overall with those kind of, I hate the word marginalized, but getting together with those populations of the black and brown women especially, but everyone who is being kind of pushed aside in those efforts with the heterosexual populations who aren't being targeted in prevention and HIV education, heterosexual men and women, to really get them those seats at the tables at these larger organizations. Like we just came from USCHA. They had this whole panel, this platform of people from across the nation and the world. And they did not say, except for one 5-minute blip of a woman talking about her beginning work, did not mention women, did not talk at all about heterosexual men. So it's so much missed opportunity to really engage the true populations that are vulnerable right now. So I would love to hear what you guys think about that.
Before we answer the question, we got two more questions, and we'll have to in the panel. You know, one of the things as we get involved is that the question that she put on the table about being invited to the table or being at the table, and so we hear that same, you all need to be at the table. And for like 3 years, I heard that, like, you all need to be at the table. So I called Mr. Larry Bryant. I said, Mr. Larry Bryant, you know, where is this table at? I thought the table is in D.C. You know, this is large table in D.C. that I need to get to where I could eat. Because I didn't know what the table was. And sometimes, yeah, the table is wherever you put it. But a lot of times people that just go to agencies and get services, people that don't work in the field, they're not afforded the opportunity to go to a USCA. They're not afforded the opportunity to be at the International Conference on Stigma. And so when you talk to them about the table, they don't even know what you're talking about. And it's like sometimes we use words and jargon and we use acronyms, but nobody tells us what exactly are you talking about. And so when I learned exactly what the table was, and I seen how we were being excluded, I was on the same page Larry is, just like, okay, Howard University gave us one plank last year. This year we got another plank. By the time of next year, we'll have a table built. Yeah, I mean that's the bottom line, is that we have to build our own table, because we're not going to be included by some agencies or by some people that get the money, and so we're going to end the epidemic by 2030, and how we got to do it, we're willing to do it. We're willing to engage. Nothing for us without us, and it's us. So we're willing to work with each and every one that wants to be a part of building that table and building that bridge.
Yeah, so I just have an observation. I think it's a powerful platform, but it appears to offer some exclusion. So I'm sitting here thinking about heterosexual black men, but what about those black men who refer to themselves as being on the down low and perhaps have not disclosed that they're heterosexual? That's one observation. And the other observation is that, as an academic professor and as a person who has published in HIV/AIDS research, stigma is stigma is stigma. Whether you're heterosexual or whether you're LGBTQ. So it just seems to be, the table may need to be broader, and particularly for funded purposes. We have this, if we want to eradicate HIV/AIDS, I think we need to be inclusive and not offer.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you get my point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, you guys. So my name is Lamar from Miami. There are three things that I wanted to actually speak on real quick. Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your bravery and actually stepping outside of the box. Disclosing your status through storytelling, basically. Just a couple of years ago, I'm not sure if you guys have heard of Thrive SS out of Atlanta. I was a part of their GRIO project, and that was 5 African-American gay men that actually comes from the high 5 prevalence in the South. I represent Miami. You had Atlanta, Baton Rouge, Jackson, Mississippi, and New Orleans. And the storytelling at that time, even though we are in a new era where we're getting over stigma just a little bit, stigma still exists, right? Because people are not actually receiving the information, because we talk about it all the time. We have those seats at the tables, but when we have those seats at the tables, we need to actually figure out, what does it mean to have a seat at the table? It's not just coming up and grabbing a seat and listening. You need to have a seat at the table, meaning that you have a plate at the table. You have a discussion about what is being brought to the table. That's what having a seat at the table looks like, right? So I remember having that experience of being in a griot, which is an African storyteller, and having the ability to share my experience, strength, and hope, because being a part of the community, I am a person living with HIV, I am a Black African-American gay man, so it's just like I'm in the statistics, right? Like, I'm a part of that, and today it's okay. But I remember being just like you guys, afraid, not having the ability to step out and being in my own comfort zone. So I remember hiding and running from one hospital to the next, like trying to figure out, like, I don't want my aunts to know, and all the systems were basically the same. So I remember having that experience. There was a new campaign that Alberto and myself were just a part of called Ending Stigma Free Miami campaign. We just did a billboard, which is located in Miami, and it will be worldwide. I put that out in the atmosphere, that it will be worldwide. And that campaign, that billboard, sits in the heart of Miami, of where stigma really is attached to, right? And to see the faces, and on that billboard, it talks about people first language, right? because we know what the stigma looks like, and we're trying to get away from those words. So what's next for us? And it's literally just stepping outside of that box. There was a young lady on that campaign. I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna shut up. There was a young lady on that campaign. She's been diagnosed for since 1987. And I remember her saying that she has never disclosed her status before to anyone because she carried it around like it was her baby. And I can talk about it because that's my sister, right, of woman of trans experience. And she carried that around for so many years where she felt like she needed to hide and run from people because of what they may say. That campaign was her first outlet. That billboard was the first thing that she did in order to step out of her comfort zone and let it all go. I believe in order for us to actually get past and do what we need to do to end stigma, we need to gather around, like have conferences like this, more conferences like this, where everybody get access, right? The young man just talked about it, where we all need access. It's not just who is and who is not. Like, we all need to have a seat at the table. We all need to have those listening ears and that mouth to speak. That's how we sit at the table and we end conversations like stigma.
Thank you.
Community investment, yes. Can I just say one thing about the stigma is stigma is stigma is stigma? I'm going to push back against that. Because much like all of our lived experiences, you and I are both black men, but we probably don't share, I can't assume that, but we probably don't share the same experiences. So the idea that my stigma or any person's stigma that they're living through is replicable or solvable by one-size-fits-all solutions, I think is conflating the issue. To understand stigma is to understand stigma as a cloud filled with tiny droplets of water. And each one of those droplets is individual and affects individuals differently. And I think if we just conflate this stigma to being this cloud, we will never truly disconnect it.
Whether you're heterosexual, whether you're black or white or polka dot, it's going to be the same.
Gotcha.
Because the issues are the same around HIV, whether you're a heterosexual man or you're LGBTQ, the issues are the same.
Again, I want to push back. We can talk about this offline because we're about to wrap up. But I just wanted to push back that we all have like individualized experiences. I feel what you're saying, but I think the bigger picture is we need to treat each other as individuals. And we need to not just, like, I remember someone solving or thinking that solving their outreach problem was just unlocking a door so people could come in. Like, that's not outreach. And they figured, like, if I just create an unlocked door, anyone's going to walk through that. And just assuming that's the case, because based on this stigma is stigma is stigma, then we're kind of defeating the purpose of identifying and individualizing health and treatment plans for people that need them. So that's all I'm saying, but we can talk about this further.
I would like to thank everyone for attending this our talk, and this is how we the powers peer support breaking the change of stigma as we age with HIV. The pain shared is pain lessened, and what I want to go back through the panel again, and this is HIV. When you talked about policy, HIV stands for How I Vote. It's millions of people living with HIV, so we can collaborate with everybody to go to the polls. HIV is How I Vote. And so HIV is also is How I Vibe. HIV is How I Vibe. And I'm privileged to be with a panel, people that vibe in life. We have Mr. Larry Bryant. You know, he works in the mental health field. He's a professional photographer. We have we have D. Ray. He's a professional DJ. Yeah. We have Mr. Alberto. He does advocacy work. We have Mr. Clayton. He's a peer navigator. I work in HIV prevention. I have a program called Successful Returning Citizens. I go inside the prison and work with stigma, people getting out of prison. And we have a retired person. And Tony, not only is he retired, but he trained children in the neighborhood how to swim. He had, at 3 years in a row, he had the top swimming team in the city of Cleveland. That's how we vibe, and I'd like to thank everyone for attending this presentation. And all our gratitude goes out to Ms. Patty Houston and Howard University, and thank y'all for inviting us again. Okay, then, right back.
No, it's okay.